Welcome to More Than Miles, the podcast created to look deep into what it means to be a runner and endurance athlete. Our episodes are filled with real stories from real runners, elite to the everyday athlete. We bring together healthcare providers, athletes, and dive deep into topics that matter most to runners. I'm Dr. Kate Mihevik-Edwards, physical therapist, author, athlete, and complete coffee addict.
And I'm Dr. Casey Sinders, physical therapist, athlete, and pun expert extraordinaire. We're so passionate about changing running culture to improve the health, wellness, and fulfillment of our endurance athlete community. And we hope that these conversations inspire you to focus on putting your health first so that performance and PRs can follow. Now let's get to the show.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to More Than Miles. Today we have Dr. Kayla Balcom on the show. I don't know if you remember, but we had Dr. Kayla Balcom on the show. I think it was April of 2022. And in that episode, we talked a lot about mental health, and it was really, really great. And so she's back again, but this time she's coming to talk about performance. Dr. Balcom works with us at the Atlanta Track Club with some of the elite athletes, and she also works at Georgia Tech as the director of sports psychology. She works with student athletes, and she also has a small private practice in the community for clients, student athletes, and elite and professional athletes. So Dr. Balcom has a great background. And if you want, you can always go back and see her first episode or listen to her first episode before you come back around and listen to this one. It all depends on what you want. The whole picture of mental health, I would advise listening to both episodes. I'm not sure if we've ever had the same guest on twice. Have we, Casey?
No.
Am I the first returner?
You
First
are.
Yes.
Oh, I feel so special.
You should. And so today's guest is Dr. Kayla Balcom. Excuse me, that was my...
I'm married into the name, so it's okay if you flub it up.
Well, I don't usually, and we're friends, so I should know better, but I'll start again. Dr. Kayla Balcom.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, I mean, this is exciting. I think that one of the reasons we wanted to have you again is because a lot of our guests, but we could have talked for a really long time previously. But also the other thing is, I think right now where we are kind of in the world and the time that we're in, psychology is such a big thing. Mental health is such a big thing. People are actually understanding that mental health is a continuum and we all have it. And no matter where we are, we should understand it. And so you're a sports psychologist, and this, podcast is for athletes and runners. And I think we just need to talk about it more. So we're glad you're here.
Thanks. I'm so glad to be back. I love seeing you guys.
I know. We don't do it enough.
Now, our first podcast, we talked a lot about vulnerability in the athletic space and, this idea of mental toughness and being tough as an athlete. As Kate mentioned before, the direction I was thinking about going with this one is a little bit more on the performance side. So how do people address their mental health pre-race, during a race, post-race, since we're mostly talking about endurance athletes here. So we translate into this to performance or competition or whoever or whatever the listener might be getting ready for. But before we kind of get into that, I do want to remind our audience who you are and what you do as a sports psychologist. So what is your background?
I'm a sports psychologist, like you both have been sharing. I got my degree in counseling psychology with a specialization in sport. What that means is I'm a generalist clinician. When I meet with anyone, including athletes, but also non-athletes, I talk to them just about their human experience. I'm a generalist clinician. I talk about anything and everything. The sport specialization just gives me a little bit more insight into an athlete's world experience, because athletes do have a unique set of stressors that non-athletes do not experience. And so being able to talk about and address those unique stressors and relate to that individual in that way, that's where the sports psychologist specialization comes in. But my work, I always tell people this, I think I shared this last time on the podcast as well. If I'm seeing, 30 clients in a week, 85% of that work, even if it was 100% athletes, 85% of that work is traditional therapy. It's not just talking about sport, but that frame of reference does place context to the things that they're experiencing. And so my background is in mental health, general population with an emphasis in sports. My personal background is was a figure skater most of my life, was introduced to sports psychology very early, and pursued courses through high school and college that helped me solidify what I wanted to study and what I wanted to learn. But I'm a fan of athletes. People always ask me, what's your favorite sport? I mean, it sounds terrible. I work in collegiate athletics. I don't have a favorite sport. I am just a fan of athletes. I love the individual who chooses to pursue something at a high degree and the passion and grit and perseverance and resilience it takes to sustain that. I'm such a fan of that type of person. And that's why I choose to do what I do.
I'm such a fan of that type of person too. It's true. And I think your background and, as in sports actually opens the doors for people like that and people like us too, because for so long there was such a, undertone about going to take care of your mental health. But it was always that I know with my patients, if I'm like, look, she's a sports psychologist, she understands what you do. They're like, oh, okay, I'll go. Mm-hmm. It's a door opener.
We like to talk to people that we believe are going to understand what we're going through at some level, to some degree.
Yeah, I think it's very true.
Yeah, I think people come in the door for the sports performance benefits and then stay for the like actual like therapy. Like I have these other things going on in my life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, they stay for life.
Yeah. I mean, nearly 100% of the time someone will come in because they just want to talk about performance anxiety. And we never are just talking about performance anxiety. So you're exactly right, Casey.
That's all right. You have to start somewhere.
Yep.
I did want to talk about performance anxiety today, though.
Sure. Yeah.
We did. Sorry, I'm laughing because I love you, Casey. And yes,
I 100% will get off topic. You will have to rein me in. And that's okay. I accept the leash.
It's totally fine. And I promise I'm not going to talk too much about myself today, Kate. But
yeah, right.
I find that performance anxiety is just your life anxiety that shows up in a sports setting. And so you see these themes that repeat themselves in other areas of your life. So you can't address it only in sport without addressing it in other places.
1,000%. Yes.
So that is my soapbox that I think I'll get off now. But so performance anxiety, right? So let's talk about, so people have been, let's use the example of a marathon, right? You're training for months and months and months. This race is coming up and someone is nervous, right? They have the pre-race jitters. So let's say someone expresses this anxiety to you. What kind of questions do you ask them to try to get at the root of, okay, where is this coming from and what do we do about it?
I mean, a few things initially pop into my head. The first one being it's completely normal and appropriate to be nervous in that situation. Nervousness in itself is not a bad thing. It's what we choose to do with that energy and how we choose to direct that energy. So the thing I typically ask people, athletes, to acknowledge for themselves is be a little bit reflective and help identify for yourself what level you need to be at for your peak performance. Everybody's level looks a little bit different, but there's kind of that stereotypical image that you'll see. It's the bell-shaped curve, the upside down U. We use that in sports psychology as well. And our peak performance exists right at the top of that bell curve. But how to get to that peak performance looks a little bit different for everybody. For me, I needed to be a little bit nervous and agitated. I needed that energy in my body to help me perform to my peak. Other athletes need to be totally calm and have none of that nervous energy because they perform best when they are in a space that feels very calm, very comfortable. And other athletes need to have a slightly higher level of arousal. We call it arousal anxiety. And so reflecting inward, acknowledging for yourself, where do you actually see your best performance? Because if your best performance exists in a space where you have a little bit of arousal and you are trying to eliminate that by breathing techniques, calming strategies, you're actually putting yourself in a position to perform poorly, or at least not as well as you could perform because your best performance comes from a space with a little bit of arousal. So one, addressing that nervousness is appropriate, and then acknowledging where's your best performance exist and how can we help get you there. Some of that might be, okay, we need to artificially enhance the arousal, do some jumping jacks, take a quick lap, get your heart rate up. So we can almost mimic that level of arousal in your body. And for some of us, it's okay, we need to go do a mindful meditation, a visualization, a breathing exercise to lower it down. But it first requires you to know what that level looks like for you. And most people don't spend a lot of time thinking about that because they are just so worried about not being nervous.
So it would take some experimentation, right? You'd have to kind of reflect on how you felt pre-race, and this doesn't just happen, right? People have to reflect on their experiences to find out. Right.
Yeah. So one of the stereotypes, I don't think that's the right word I'm looking for, but one of the things that I often hear, one of the common phrases I often hear athletes share with me is, I want to find my flow state. Because there's this assumption, and it's an inaccurate assumption. There's this assumption that flow state is where you get your best performance. Flow state is just when things feel natural and easy and they're coming and you don't have to put in a lot of thought. It is kind of flowing and pouring out of you, but flow state does not guarantee your best performance. Your best performance comes from knowing your body personally, your mind personally at a very intimate level, and knowing how to get yourself to that place. And so that's where pre-performance routines come from. If somebody enters a race a little too calm and they need to be a little bit more elevated, maybe they listen to really energizing music, or that you see them doing high knees down the field, or this is where pre-performance routines come from. This is where calming exercises come from, visualization exercises, mindfulness exercises. It's that person knows themselves so intimately. They know exactly how to get themselves to the space of their peak performance, which may or may not include a flow state.
Or maybe they don't know themselves and they just watched everybody else and they're doing what they see around them. I mean, I used to puke sometimes before races, which is really great.
As like part of your pre-performance routine?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Especially if it was like a major race trying to qualify for the Boston Marathon. And I just thought that was kind of normal.
Yeah.
If I'm honest. And I do think that people just mimic what other people are doing. So I love that kind of insight of, hey, maybe check in with yourself and see, how did you feel prior to a race?
Yeah.
Was that race one of your best races? And if it was, maybe let's try to, mimic what we did during this race.
Mimic what works for you, not what works for people around you. And this is a conversation we have to have with coaches a lot, because they'll often have the same warm up for every athlete or the same pre-performance stretching or preparation. And giving the athletes permission to take 5 to 10 minutes outside of the coach's planning so that they can get themselves in their best pre-race state. And so not just mimicking what everybody else around them is doing, but allowing them to mimic what works best for them repeatedly, and giving each individual athlete the space they need to get them to that zone.
I love that.
Yeah. So question about routines, right? So we've interviewed several athletes from the track club and beyond on this podcast. And we've asked a few of them if they have any race superstitions or routines or anything like that. And they almost always say no, because I don't want to freak out if this one thing isn't available, or if I don't have room to do this, or things like that. What's your perspective on that?
A lot of athletes have superstitions. A lot of individuals who are in the performance space, actors, athletes, surgeons, musicians, they often are a little bit superstitious. We talked about The Office last time. I'm going to bring it full circle and talk about The Office again. They're not superstitious, but they're a little stitious.
Yeah.
Where they do the same thing every time, or close to. One great example is if you look at a baseball player, if you look at a pitcher on the mound, often they are doing the same thing before each pitch, or someone in the box, they are doing the same thing before each swing. It's their pre-performance routine. The key to a pre-performance routine, that's what's helping you get into the right headspace and right physical space to perform your task. But you have to be flexible, because you're right. What if this one thing is missing and I don't have access to it? You want to make sure your pre-performance routine is something that you're fairly certain you will have access to nearly 100% of the time when you're performing the task. So I don't want some obscure item that I might not have with me all the time. For a baseball player in the box, they're pretty sure that they're going to have the box, they're going to have the dirt, they're going to have their bat, they're going to have their helmet. These are not things that are going to change. So your pre-performance routine should help get you in the state that you want to be in for your best performance, and flexible enough that if something's missing, it doesn't throw everything off. You are in control. You want to manage controllable variables. And you want to make sure that if you are including something in your pre-performance routine, it's something you will likely have access to 100% of the time when you're completing this task.
Yeah, that's definitely what people are afraid of in pre-race routine. I mean, you can think about it all the way from the night before, all the way up to starting line. And so I think that's where people get hung up is, well, what if I don't have the same food? What if I don't?
Right.
But even if we just break it down to the, 10, 15 minutes before a race, that could be very helpful.
Well, and what harm does it do if you need to put your left shoe on before your right shoe? If you have your best performance when you put your left shoe on first, what harm does it do to put your left shoe on first?
Only that easy to have a good performance. I've always putting that left shoe on first.
Because the one time I did that, it was not as good.
If that is where your mind goes, where it brings you, because what's happening there is you're not running well because you put your left shoe on first. You're running well because when you put your left shoe on first, it made you feel calmer and more confident because that's the thing that you always do, and it relaxed you. If I put my right shoe on first or someone forces me to do that, I am now anxious. I'm not performing poorly because I didn't do it the way I want to. I'm performing poorly because now I'm anxious. And that anxiety has taken me to a different level than what works best for me. So what harm does it do if your athlete needs to put on a shoe or your athlete needs to do 5 jumping jacks? If it's not causing any harm, let them work through their pre-performance routine so that it can get them to the state that both they want and you as their coach want so that they can give their best performance.
Let's move on a little bit to visualization. So this is something that you actually did an awesome video for Fast Bananas, and I love it. But you talked a lot about visualization. So, you could talk about this probably for a whole hour in itself.
Yeah.
But it is very difficult to do. And it can be very frustrating if you try it over and over again and you don't think you're doing it well enough. And that's how, we tend to be sometimes. But maybe talk about how can athletes start this process of visualization and why would they want to?
Yeah. So the data and the research behind visualization is fascinating. What we now know is that when we visualize something, the same parts of our brain are firing as if we were actually doing the skill. So if I'm visualizing myself running, the same parts of my brain are activated as if I was actually going on a run. So while my body is not doing it, my brain knows the mechanism to make it happen. And it is actually using that mechanism to visualize. So the data behind visualization is incredibly powerful. It helps athletes recover from injury more quickly. It helps athletes return to pre-injury performance more quickly, helps athletes reduce anxiety, increase confidence. Why wouldn't we want to use this skill if these are some of the outcomes of it? So ways to start, there is, I think I did this in one of the videos maybe for Fast Bananas, but there's an image that you can find online. It's pretty easy to find where it has varying degrees of red shaded boxes. It goes from a non-shaded box to a light pink to a darker pink, all the way to very crimson red. And the idea is if you've never done visualization before, get in a comfortable place where it's quiet, close your eyes, and picture in your mind a red square. As brightly red as you can with the sharpest corners possible, picture a red square, and then see how close you are on that scale in terms of your visualization ability. This is something you can work on. It's something you can enhance. It's something you can improve. And then from there, you want to start visualizing yourself doing actual skills. You want to visualize yourself doing something that you are struggling with, something that you're great at, something that you want to work on. But there are some rules with visualization. You want to visualize yourself doing it in real time. Often the feedback is people visualize in slow motion. That's not helpful if you're trying to build a body-brain connection. You want to visualize it in real time so that your mind is capturing and storing the mechanism as it's supposed to be done. You want to visualize yourself doing it correctly. And sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes we visualize ourselves messing up, and that's okay. In your mind, actually stop the visualization, rewind it, and start over. Or visualize yourself overcoming the mistake. That's almost more helpful because we cannot always guarantee that the perfect performance is going to happen. Sometimes we have to overcome barriers and obstacles. And then the last piece, visualize with as much vividness, clarity, and detail as you possibly can. Incorporate every single sensation that you can possibly incorporate: sight, sound, smell, touch, taste, all of them, so that you are visualizing yourself in the scenario that you want yourself to perform. You're visualizing yourself doing it correctly, and you're visualizing yourself feeling confident, comfortable, and proud of yourself.
Awesome. Thank you, Kayla.
Mm-hmm.
So when an athlete is visualizing, are they visualizing themselves in like first person or in third person?
Great question. Either. So some people visualize in third person, some people visualize in first person. It doesn't really matter which. It's just important to know which one you are. So when I visualize in third person. It is like I am watching myself on a screen. And for some individuals, they visualize in their own body. Both of them are creating that mind-body connection. Both of them are building that brain mechanism. You just need to know which one you visualize. So I will always ask them before we start a visualization process, close your eyes, picture yourself standing in a field somewhere. Are you standing in your own body, or do you see yourself standing in a field? Just so that they are aware, are they first person or are they third person?
So in an event like, let's say most running events take a long time. So unless you're maybe an 800-meter runner, maybe even a miler where you're just like laying there for a lot of our athletes, not a very long time at all.
Yeah.
It's totally possible. But for someone who's running a marathon, right, for them, would the advice be to pick out certain parts of the race and visualize those parts, like maybe practicing when something goes wrong or something like that, or imagining the pace feeling hard and what you're going to do about it? Or what would be the best strategy for someone who has a longer event?
That's exactly right. Is most athletes at that point are going to know where their sticky points are, or at least what they're most nervous about. And so picking out that point and visualizing that experience is completely appropriate. You can visualize yourself at the starting line. You can visualize yourself crossing the finish line. But if you're also aware of a sticky point somewhere in the middle, or, every time I reach mile 7, I feel like I can't go any longer, or whatever it may be, identify that for yourself and do a visualization exercise of overcoming that and feeling the pain, but not letting the pain stop you, and using the energy in your legs to carry you forward, whatever it may be. But yeah, you're exactly right. Kind of picking out those moments and doing a visualization through those.
That's helpful. It's as painful as it is to imagine the lows in a marathon before you even get there. It's very important work, and it can be helpful. I was hoping to also get to use an office reference. Oh, Kate is already disappointed in me.
I'm never disappointed.
I was sitting on my couch and thinking about this conversation, and I happened to have The Office on in the background, as I oftentimes do. It was the episode where they're planning Toby's goodbye party. And Phyllis is on the phone, and she calls, I think, the operator at the time, because it's all set in the early 2000s, and she asked for an anti-gravity machine. Anti-gravity, antidepressant. And Phyllis goes, sure,
that'll work.
So great segue. We often hear that people should focus on the mental side of sport just as much as the physical side. So what does this mean to you? And if you were saying, hey, as an athlete, you need to take care of your mental health and the mental side of your game or your competition, how would they do that? What does this mean to you?
Ooh, that's a really good question. What does this mean to me? I think we are running into, we kind of alluded to this earlier on, where so many more people are talking about the importance of mental health. I'm laughing because they're talking about the importance of mental health. They're not really explaining what that means. They're just saying mental health is really important.
Move on.
Great. So sometimes
we acknowledge it exists.
Right. Yeah. Amazing. And now what? So I think some people are coming into therapy not really knowing what mental health looks like. They, so when they come into a physical therapy session, you guys, I'm going to make an assumption about your job. Please correct me if I'm wrong. You're going to do an assessment. You're going to determine what treatment might be needed. You're going to explain that to the patient. You'll make changes as changes are needed. It's a flexible treatment plan, but they have an idea of what the treatment's going to look like, how long the treatment's going to last. Am I wrong? Right?
Generally speaking, yeah.
Generally speaking, I'm on the right.
Yeah.
Okay. So not even that really happens when people come into a mental health space. They don't know what that means. So often they are not sure what treatment looks like. They're not really sure what they're going to be working on. They've just been told mental health is important. You're the mental health professional, so I thought I'd come talk to you. And so I think providing some clarity around what does mental health mean? You need to engage in self-care so that you are not running depleted every day out of the week and hoping to be re-energized on the weekends. It means that you are setting boundaries in your life so that you are not constantly overworking yourself in areas that don't make sense for you or don't fit for you. It means having open and honest communication with the important people in your world, expressing vulnerability as needed so you can ask for help if it's appropriate, in addition to managing symptoms of anxiety, depression, things like that. So I think, Kate, you mentioned everyone has mental health. Everyone has mental health. Not everyone has a mental illness. And so when we are thinking about taking care of someone's mental health, what we are talking about is self-care, relationships, vulnerability, emotions, boundaries. That's what we talk about when we're talking about mental health. When we're talking about mental illness, that's when we're focusing on depression, anxiety, personality disorders, eating disorders, substance abuse. When someone comes in to talk about general mental health issues, they do not have to be depressed to benefit from mental health services. They just sometimes need direction on how to better take care of their health and wellness.
Ooh, louder for the people in the back.
God, that's so true, right? I think our world would be so much better. I'm sure I said this on our podcast before because I feel like I say it all the time, but if everybody could go to therapy, the world would be a better place.
Yeah. But people believe that therapy is reserved for those who have mental illness.
Yeah, that's not true.
And that's just not true. Mm-mm.
Mm-mm.
And so, I mean, you can understand why athletes might be hesitant to take care of their mental health because the stereotype around therapy is that it's reserved for people. I mean, I'll use a word that we don't use in this field anymore. It's reserved for people who are crazy. That's not true. But if that's your view of mental health services, why on earth would you take care of your mental health with the assistance of a professional? You're going to try to figure it out. You're going to try to grind your way through it. And without knowing how to set boundaries, without knowing what your boundaries are, without knowing how to engage in self-care, grinding through it does not work. You are going to be burnt out, overburdened, and stressed. And you will absolutely not get your best performance if that's how you're operating.
But Kayla, words like boundaries, vulnerability, those are very scary words.
Yeah.
They really
are. I was recently look at this full circle. I was recently dropping my son off at daycare. I talked about my son every second I could last time.
That's right.
And there was a sign in the waiting room of a football training camp starting at the age of 4. I said, why on earth are 4-year-olds going to a week-long football training camp? And that's part of it too, is we're training our children from such a young age, this particular context of the world of sport. And while the world of sport is opening its eyes to the idea of mental health, we're training them very young to grind it out, rub some dirt in it, push through it, suck it up. And then we're also expecting them to take care of their mental health, but we're not really providing them with the tools on how to do that.
Yeah, I agree. And we're also not teaching them, that there's something outside of their sport. Nothing.
Yeah.
All you do is spend all of your energy, all of your time, and all of your friends and everything all in this one place. And if it doesn't work out, too bad for you.
Yeah. Forced retirement, injury. We see a lot of identity crisis develop in those moments because so much of who they are was abruptly taken from them. And I mean, imagine if one of the strongest parts of your identity was taken away from you today unexpectedly, and no one had taught you how to receive the support and resources you need to help overcome that. That would be terrifying for anybody.
Yeah, I don't have to imagine.
Yeah.
I understand completely, wholeheartedly. Yeah. Well, hopefully this podcast with every other one that we've talked about previously, people will say, you know what, maybe it's time. But I do have to say one thing around that. One thing I'm running into, Kayla, is that there aren't a lot of mental health providers available anymore. And it's really hard to get into mental health providers and find someone that fits for you. I mean, I know I have plenty of people that I wish could get in to see someone like you or someone, like other people we know, but oftentimes they're just so booked because people finally understand that it's a good resource. Like, what do you suggest when they're in that kind of position?
Yeah, this is one of the internal conflicts that I sit with, because not only are mental health providers hard to find, they're also usually very booked. Most of the time, they don't accept insurance, and they're very expensive. It's a luxury business, and that's so sad because everybody has mental health needs, and it's so hard to find somebody that has availability, that's affordable, and can see you quickly. So I think at minimum, just recognizing how to take care of yourself. I don't know how much in detail we talked about this last time, but I always tell people at minimum, you need to be eating every day, drinking every day, and engaging in self-care every day. And so if you are having a hard time finding someone that can see you quickly, at minimum, you should be replenishing your cup on a day-to-day basis throughout the day. That's one of the things that I educate people on most often. This is what a typical day looks like for most people. I work hard, I grind it out, I'm busy, nonstop from the start of my day till the time it's time for dinner and I get ready for bed. And then I'm going to try to fit in some self-care time because it's the only time I have time for it, which is then what we run into. There's a new concept called revenge bedtime procrastination, where I have been busy all day long. I've had no time for myself. I know that I need to go to bed because I need to get a good night's sleep so that I can feel energized for tomorrow. But I'm going to sit here for the next 2 hours and scroll on my phone or watch my favorite show or look through Instagram because I have had no time for myself at all today. And this is the only time I have for myself. So I'm going to take that time back. And so it's called revenge bedtime procrastination, where I'm putting off the thing that I need, which is bed, because I've had no time for myself today. That is not helpful because you are just going to wake up the next day even more depleted, and you're going to need more revenge bedtime procrastination because you have no time during the day. You have to find pockets in the day, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an 11-minute walk from one building to the next, throw some AirPods in, listen to some music. You have to find time in the day, throughout the day, to take care of yourself. And at a minimum, if that's all you can do right now while you're waiting to get in for services, that will change so many things for so many people.
That's great advice. Thank you, Kayla.
I hear like intentionality in it, right? Like, so we have to have some sort of intentionality when we're overbooking ourselves. So we have to schedule self-care time with the same intention as we do with other things in our lives.
Yeah. And the resistance I often hear is, I don't have time for that. I don't have time for that. You can double dip on a few things. You can put things together. You always have to brush your teeth. You always have to eat. You always have to take a shower. There are certain things that you are doing every single day. Put things together. If you want to brush your teeth and turn your phone onto your favorite TV show, great, do it. If you have to listen to a podcast while you're taking a shower, okay, there is no rule that says you can't do that. If you want to cook yourself dinner while listening to music, awesome. Or if you don't want to cook yourself dinner and you'd rather go for a walk and have Uber Eats deliver you some food, great. Finding ways to blend things together with parts of your day that are pretty consistent and stay the same. Building self-care time, intentional self-care time into that if you truly don't have time. However, anytime I've ever worked with somebody, you have a few minutes here and there. If I ask anyone to pull out their phone and do the analysis of how long they've spent on their phone in a day, most of us are spending anywhere between 3 to 5 hours on our phone. You can be doing some self-care during the day if you have 3 to 5 hours to spend on your phone.
As my son would say, burn.
I mean, I do the same thing with my patients too. I'm like, you can, take 5 minutes and do one set of your exercises. You don't have to do everything at like 1 30-minute block, or
Right.
on
Right.
one foot while you're brushing your teeth, or while you're microwaving your oatmeal. I don't know.
Yep.
And I actually did talk to a patient about this yesterday, and it was like mind blowing for him because he was very like schedule everything on the 30 minutes, on the hour. And he was like, oh, I could do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You'd be amazed at how much you get done. I was notorious in college for, you have 40 minutes in between classes. 40 minutes isn't enough to do anything. I'm not going to start my homework because I can't finish my homework. Right. So if I can't start something and finish something in a 40-minute block, I'm just not going to do it right now. I'll do it later. Yep. I wasted so much time with that mentality. You can get so much done in 40 minutes. So allowing yourself to use the blocks of time that you have to get done what you can. And if you have a task that you know is going to take an hour and you only have 20 minutes, okay, well, at the end of the day, now you only have 40 minutes left of that task to complete instead of an hour of that task to complete. Yeah. Use the time you have. We all have windows of time in our day. The best use of that time is finding intentional spaces to engage in self-care. You have to keep filling your cup up throughout the day because you can deplete today and you can also borrow from tomorrow. But if you are not refilling your cup up, you are just going into the negative on a day-to-day basis. And that's not helpful for your mental health or your physical health. Jeez.
No, it's not helpful for health at all.
Yeah.
All right, let's switch gears yet again, because I want to make sure that we do talk about some of these performance specifics that we really wanted to talk about. Mm-hmm. So our next topic is fear of failure. And so specifically, the question is, how does an athlete deal with this idea of fear of failure when they're trying to reach a goal? Because it is just an idea, but it's very real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Fear of failure and self-fulfilling prophecy often go hand in hand, where if I have this fear of failure, I might self-sabotage unintentionally so that I never achieve that goal. And then I ultimately prove that the fear of failure was appropriate because I can't ever attain it. So rather than fear of failure, it's too flippant to say, okay, well, don't think this instead. But rather than fear of failure, addressing all of the controllable variables that you have responsibility over and setting yourself up to engage in scaffolding type goals. What I mean by scaffolding type goals is if I know what my ultimate goal is, I need to identify what the steps are to get me to that ultimate goal. So your listeners will love this. I'm a jogger, not a runner. I run a 10-minute mile. I'm very proud of my 10-minute mile.
That's still running, Kayla.
It's still running.
If you put one foot in front of the other, you're running.
I am a very content 10-minute miler.
Perfect.
It would not be feasible or appropriate for me to set a goal for myself to go out tomorrow and run a 7-minute mile.
No.
It just would not happen. And so I have to scaffold my goals for myself in a way that makes achieving them challenging, but realistic. And so fear of failure comes in when other people set goals for us that we know are slightly out of our reach, that we don't feel comfortable trying to attain because we're familiar with our own capabilities. Fear of failure comes in when there is some type of component that relies on our performance. So if you're getting paid for your performance or you get some type of sponsorship deal for your performance and it relies on you achieving certain things, the way to help navigate around that is build your scaffold. Identify what your goals are, where they are slightly beyond your reach, but they are attainable to do so. And then identify your daily tasks that will help you achieve that goal. And our daily tasks are the controllable variables. One of them may be help manage my anxiety. And maybe a daily task is receive mental health support, engage in breathing exercises, do mindfulness meditation, engage in self-care. We can't forget that the anxiety is a piece that has to be overcome as well. And so if we're just addressing the physical goals and we're experiencing fear of failure, we're not addressing the mental health goals that need to be in place to help overcome the fear of failure.
Yeah. Ooh, that was a cameo by Ollie. I just heard him barking. Ollie was in full agreement, in case anyone was unaware. Okay, so then we've kind of talked now about fear of failure, but now we're in a race, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So if we are racing and during that race something unexpected happens, so they're more fatigued than they expected, they drop something like their gel on the ground, or
Mm-hmm.
somebody else passes them that they weren't expecting them to pass, or
Mm-hmm.
something that they just didn't anticipate that they don't
Mm-hmm.
want to happens. How
Mm-hmm.
can an athlete kind of learn to deal with, one, the unexpected, or two,
Mm-hmm.
deal with something they just don't want to happen?
Yeah, I think so. Let's assume that people listening to this are listening to this maybe in preparation for something, or maybe following a result that they didn't like. So they're on the hunt for things that might help them. Identifying some unpredictable barriers ahead of time is really helpful. Okay, what if I'm running and I drop my gel? Okay, so I'm going to make sure that I put an extra one in my pack just in case. If somebody passes me that shouldn't be passing me because I know that I'm faster than this person, check in with yourself. How am I feeling in this race? Does my body have more to give at this point that I'm not giving? Am I feeling so fatigued that I can't push myself harder right now? Am I reserving my energy for later? Just check in with yourself. That is that person's race. I don't know what's going through that person's mind and body. I don't know why that person just passed me. It's not important for me to try to deduce that information because I'm never going to figure it out. I need to find out what my information is. And so what's your self-talk look like? Where are your energy levels? How does your body feel? And are you achieving your scaffolded level of goals? I don't care what that person's goals are. They have nothing to do with me. Some of the things that are out of our control, weather, you can never control what the weather's going to do. Your opponent's preparation. I have no idea what they've done to prepare for this race. I have no idea how well trained they're coming in, how well fueled they're coming in. It's none of my business. I can't control it. I can't control where the stations are going to be set up on the race. I can't control what time the race starts. All of these things are out of our control. The only thing I control is how well fueled I am, how well rested I am, what hydration looks like for me, my treatment that I've gotten, my recovery efforts, my self-talk, the goals I've set for myself, rather than focusing on outside things that are out of our control that are going to impact our performance. Focus on my things that are within my control that will also affect my performance.
I think the big piece to manage here when something unexpected like that happens is the self-talk piece, right? So something happens, and then our brain starts to spiral. My brain, our collective brain starts to spiral, maybe thinking too far into the future, or thinking like judging what this means. I feel more tired. This person passed me. I have 6 miles to go and I feel like this, like these kind of judgmental thoughts. And so I think learning how to manage self-talk in those situations is really important.
Yeah. The easy way to do it, I tell people I try to avoid toxic positivity in terms of self-talk. I don't think it's helpful to say things like, I'm the best runner there ever was. I'm the fastest person on this course. I'm going to beat everybody. I'm going to win first place. If those things are not true for you, it's not helpful to say those statements because you don't believe it. And if you don't believe it, it's not going to help. And so shifting the self-talk to feedback-oriented or neutral self-talk can oftentimes be much more helpful. Okay, I'm at mile 6. I'm feeling a little bit more fatigued than I normally would. What's going on for me right now? What do I need to pay attention to? Maybe I need to have a gel. Maybe I need to hydrate at the next station. Shifting the self-talk to feedback oriented. What do I need to do to get the performance that I'm looking for? What is realistic in this moment? And what can I focus on next? The other helpful piece is if you can't identify the positive self-talk to give yourself in that moment, what would someone else say to you? What would your coach say to you? What would a friend say to you? What would a teammate say to you? So that you can borrow their voices to help move you forward if your own voice is not going to do it. But our own voices absolutely should be focused on feedback-oriented things. What's in my control? What can I do right now to help provide the performance that I'm looking for?
Thanks, Kayla. It's so much easier said than done. And I keep saying thanks, Kayla, because I think it's such great advice. I'm just listening and I'm like, yeah, shaking my head. Sorry, Kayla. That's awesome.
We're just in awe. That's all.
My self-talk is, they hate everything I'm saying. They are ready to end this podcast. No, I'm just kidding. I've done a lot of work on my own self-talk.
God, me too. I have to leave myself notes and then I have to catch myself and be like,
notes are great. Post-it notes everywhere. Post-it notes in your gym bag, post-it notes in your car, on your mirror, on your water bottle. Write yourself notes.
Write yourself love notes.
Yeah. Why not? What harm is it going to do to show yourself a little bit of compassion?
I actually have to tell you something really funny about that. So we were, so I make my husband do that too. He'd probably kill me for telling everybody, but I made him write all these self-talk, like positive self-talk things and things he wants and all this stuff. And I put it on his mirror in the bathroom. And then I think someone was coming to stay at our house.
Yes.
Someone was coming to stay at our house, like that worked for him. And maybe the things were related to work that he didn't like. And Casey was there. I'm like, Casey, you have to go take all the sticky notes down out of the bathroom before the coworker stays at our house, because we were out of town and they wanted to come stay at our house. And I'm like, because then they're going to know he hates his job.
Yep. I remember.
Yeah. It was.
You're like, I have a weird request. You need to go up into our bathroom.
Or they were going to acknowledge that he was working on reframing his self-talk so that he could do his job more effectively.
Well, that wouldn't have happened, but yes, it would have been lovely. It was hysterical. He was so mad at me because I made him do it. And then we forgot and his coworker was coming and he's like, you're always making me do this crazy stuff. And I'm like, no, it's really helpful stuff.
It is interesting. We've talked about this before. And of the things that I spend most of my time talking about in therapy, self-care and self-talk are, up there every single time. It's nearly constant. But I just watch the way that we talk to my son, who's now 1.5 years. And it's so excited and it's so supportive. And I use this example a lot with children that are learning how to walk. I think I talked about this last time, where it is the most embarrassing situation for someone to learn how to walk. You fall constantly, you topple over, their heads are big. So not only are they falling, but they're constantly hitting their heads and getting bruises. And also everyone's super excited. So they're filming them constantly and watching their every move. If this was an adult, no one would be walking because that situation is so embarrassing. But children don't know that that's embarrassing. All they see are the people that love them, around them, supporting them, cheering them on. And at some point in our lives, that internal voice changes. At some point in our lives, the internal voice becomes the external criticism that we hear. And then that's all we hear is the criticism. And what we now know is one negative statement is as powerful as 10 positive statements. So to negate a single sentence of negative self-talk, I have to replace it with 10 positive statements of self-talk. And that's just a human survival mechanism. If I walk past an oven and put my hand on it 9 times and it's not turned on, that's great. If I put my hand on it 1 time and it's turned on and I burn myself, that experience is so much more powerful because it's a survival technique. I need to learn not to touch hot things. But it happens with our brains with everything. Negative experiences are significantly more powerful than positive ones. And so they hold a much higher value rating in the way that we learn. Mm-hmm. And so if we are constantly speaking to ourselves negatively, we are learning that the world is a negative place and I am not doing enough and I am not good enough and I can't succeed. We have to start replacing those so that they lose their power.
Yes, I agree. My son is not in that issue. Does not have that issue. his self-confidence is very high. And I think it's because of all the work I've done on myself and all the stuff. And so now I'm wondering, can you do too much?
Well, there's a difference
for life.
I don't think so, because I think that there is a difference between the clinical version of that, which would be narcissism, and someone who is just confident and comfortable in their own skin. And I would rather have every person feel empowered and comfortable and confident in their own skin than have a single person who bullies themselves constantly.
No, I agree, but it's very interesting to see and to be around somebody like that because we're not used to it. Because most people don't function that way. And I laugh the whole time. I'm like, well, he's right. I mean, good for him. But but it's just I'm not used to seeing such confident people, which is really sad.
Yeah. Which is crazy because we work with such elite performers and their internal dialogue does not match what other people see.
No, or their
often.
Instagram. Yeah.
Yeah. I could do an entire podcast on my hatred of social media.
All right. Well, we have time for one more question and we need to address this because otherwise Casey's head is going to explode. So the last piece is we need to talk about bad races. What if
hypothetical, someone may have had a bad race?
So, anybody could do it, but like, what if somebody has a bad race? What are some of the strategies they can use to help so that experience isn't so negative that it really impacts their future races? And actually what you said about one negative thing plus 10 positive things is really strong, which means you have to run 10 races between now and Boston Marathon, Casey, go, that are really good.
I've done 2, right? 8 more.
Not what that means.
I'm just kidding. But that's what I would have thought.
Right. Well, and here's the thing. You said, what if somebody runs a bad race? When somebody runs a race, that's not up to their standard, because also I would question the definition of bad, and I would challenge what that definition is, because it's not
lots of crying, dry heaving, walking, questioning my existence.
I mean, you don't know what that's like, though. You're just you called ahead and asked people.
Hypothetically, this is what happens.
Hypothetical questioning of existence. Yep.
Thinking sports over.
When somebody has a race that does not meet their standards, because it absolutely will happen. It's not an if it will happen, it's a when it will happen. Allowing ourselves to recognize that we're human beings. So we are not machines, which means we cannot provide the same performance exactly as the same every single time. We're humans. There are variables outside of our control. There are variables that are going to impact us. We are not technology. We are not a machine. Even technology does not perform the same function 100% of the time. And it's designed in a way to do that. So one, allowing ourselves to recognize, okay, this is not the performance that I was expecting, and do an honest assessment and reflection of what happened that was within your control. Now, if it was completely out of your control, you do have to do an honest assessment and recognize, okay, this performance was not my best, but a large part of that is because of this thing that was out of my control. That's important to acknowledge. We are not built to overcome things that are out of our control that are going to impact us, but do an honest assessment and reflection of what are the variables that were within my control that I could adjust for next time. What changes could I make? What feedback can I learn from? What can I do differently? And the hard part about that is sometimes maybe you could have done nothing differently. Maybe a lot of external factors influenced your performance that day, and you did everything within your control in a way that was going to help you achieve your peak performance. And it still wasn't the performance that you wanted. And the hard part is accepting that sometimes that happens because we are human beings and we do not get to control so much of what happens around us. And so much of what happens around us impacts what we do. And it's hard to internalize and accept that without placing a value statement on us. But that's the piece that is missing is my performance that did not meet my standards. I would work to remove bad because who knows what that means. That's very subjective. My performance that did not meet my standard is not a reflection on me as a person. It's not a reflection even of me as an athlete, because I have had other performances that did not look like this. Why am I using this one example as my definition of self as athlete and not this example when I actually performed in a way that felt more congruent with who I am? And so all that to say, a lot of internal work and allowing yourself to be a fallible human being, because we are.
So Kayla, this brought up a couple of things, and I know I said that was our last question, but it's not. So because it's our podcast. No, I'm just kidding. So the other thing around that, though, is how do we talk about it? So in a situation for a lot of athletes, and I know this happened to you, Casey, and I know this has happened to me as well. You have a race. So I'll think about, I did a Chicago marathon and I had a DNF, and I had a DNF now. I know why. It was my heart, blah, 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 whatever. I had to go to the hospital. But I was so shamed. I had so much shame around not finishing the race. And I went to work and people asked me about it over and over and over again. And my boss said, oh, she's a DNF, like making it worse, right? So announcing to everybody that, oh, Kate had a DNF. She didn't finish this marathon, not understanding what was happening inside. But like, how do you talk about it when something like that happens? I know that's a loaded question because there's two things. One, how do you even talk about it in a way when people ask you, even positively, but then also how do you address it if it's negative feedback?
So I love this question. Part of why I love this question is there's a poem, I forget who writes it, some famous person. The Man in the Arena, is that the name of the poem?
Oh, I've heard about this before.
Where they talk about, I only want the advice of other people who are in the arena with me. I think maybe it's Theodore Roosevelt, who I don't actually think he was.
Brene Brown mentions it in one of her books.
We're going to have to.
That's probably where it's coming from in my brain at the very least, where she talks about, I only want the advice of the people or the feedback of the people who are also working really hard and have an idea of what I'm doing. Your boss saying to you, oh, she's a DNF. Okay. I mean, I'd like to use a lot of colorful language, but we have to do the internal work to take in that piece of feedback and determine, is that piece of feedback accurate or not? And if it's not accurate feedback, let it go. Other people are going to make whatever judgments and opinions and assumptions about everybody that they want. We do it all the time. I'm not infallible in that area either. We are always making judgments and opinions and beliefs about people. And guess what? We are probably wrong a lot of the time. But if somebody gives us a piece of feedback, check with ourselves, is that feedback accurate? In that situation, no, the feedback is not accurate. You had a physiological situation that prevented you from completing a race. That is not accurate feedback from that person. And we can let that feedback go. We do have to do the assessment. So a lot of times athletes will get feedback from teammates, from coaches, from agents, whatever. And all of those people are certain that they are right about what that athlete is doing. I can guarantee all of those people that they are not right 100% of the time. They don't like that information because that's part of their job, is to assess an athlete's performance. That athlete is actually the only one that can do that internal assessment to determine what happened in that situation. And the athlete should be providing feedback to others about what they need to do differently moving forward.
Because that's a hard place to be.
Yeah. And that's when mental health work comes in, of learning how to communicate effectively, learning how to set boundaries. Because ideally in that situation, Kate, you would have been able to say, thank you for your feedback. This is actually what happened. Yeah. So thanks everybody for your concern. I don't want to talk about it anymore. Boundary set moving forward. And if they choose to talk about it again, those people are choosing to cross a boundary. And that makes them the asshole, not you.
Well, I'm pretty sure I knew what the situation was for that person. Yeah, I don't think they listen to our podcast.
Probably not.
Probably not.
I think telling the story for me most recently, I think, because in the beginning it was like this like raw, emotional, just everything I was upset about, being, not so nice to myself, blah, blah, blah. But then by about the 10th time telling the story, you're like, wait, what story do I want to tell? What actually represents what happened?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I think it was helpful eventually. It was painful for a very long time. It was helpful eventually.
Yeah, the power of the narrative. What narrative do we want to say? What narrative are we telling ourselves? What narrative is actually accurate? And also just, I do recommend to all athletes, post-practice, post-performance, write down what happened, what went well. Even if you didn't have a great outing, things did go well. You did actually do things well. You should acknowledge those things. What can you work on? And what do we need to do next to help get us closer to our goals? It's important to reflect regularly. And if we're not doing the reflection piece, we are just mindlessly hoping that our body does a task. It's important to reflect on the parts that we're in control of. We have to send the message to our body about what to do. If we're not reflecting on that, we are just hoping that our muscle memory takes over. And that's not the path forward to an elite athlete.
Or any athlete.
Yeah.
Well, Kayla, this has been awesome as usual.
I love you guys.
I love you too. Thank you for coming on again and being our first, only second guest. Or
wow.
I don't think that's the way you say it.
Our first
but anyway.
guest.
Yes.
It's very exciting. I feel so honored.
No, it's great. Like I said, we can never get enough of this, especially, in this world that we're living in where mental health is so important and always has been, but people finally know.
Yeah. So, we're willing to talk about it.
That's true. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening today. We are so happy that you're here. If you enjoyed this conversation, share it with a friend. Even better, share it on social media, because sharing is caring. And the more people we can reach, the better.
Another way you can help us out is by leaving a review on Spotify or Apple Podcast. So give us those 5 stars and tell us how awesome we are. Really, we love to hear how awesome we are. To support our work financially, you can also join our Patreon squad at patreon.com/morethanmiles, where for a few dollars a month, you can help us keep the show going and growing.
This season is sponsored by Fast Bananas. Why buy multiple subscriptions made for everyone when you can have one specifically crafted for runners? Fast Bananas has online yoga classes, strength training programs, meditations, recipes, communities to ask questions, and so much more. Check out Fast Bananas at fastbananas.com or follow them on Instagram at fastbananasrun.
Don't forget that training is so much more than miles.